I'm Nima Rajan. Three main federal party leaders have denounced demonstrations taking place at hospitals countrywide. The demonstrations are in protest of public health restrictions to battle COVID-19. Justin Trudeau says a re-elected Liberal government will make it a criminal offense to block access to healthcare facilities or to intimidate their workers or patients. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole says these protests outside hospitals are completely unacceptable. And the NDP's Jagmeet Singh is also telling anti-vaccine protesters to stay away from healthcare settings. Meanwhile, a new poll indicates support for Justin Trudeau's Liberals and Erin O'Toole's Conservatives are deadlocked. The poll, conducted by Leger in collaboration with the Canadian Press, shows both parties are tied with the support of 32% of decided voters. The NDP is in third place with 20%. A similar poll conducted 2 weeks ago had the Conservatives ahead with 34%. This is compared with 30% for the Liberals and 24% for the New Democrats. British Columbia is expanding its pandemic immunization program. It will mean all healthcare workers and volunteers must get a COVID-19 shot. Dr. Bonnie Henry says the vaccine mandate will take effect October 26th. It will be a condition of employment for all workers, physicians, contractors, and volunteers in health facilities. Alberta Health Services is asking for jail time for a Calgary man and his brother. They were found guilty of contempt after deliberately violating COVID-19 health orders. Artur Pawlowski, a pastor, and his brother, Dawid, were arrested in May. They are accused of organizing an illegal gathering, along with promoting and attending an illegal gathering. The health provider asked that the pastor be jailed for 21 days and that his brother be sentenced to 10. Saskatchewan is reissuing an emergency order to combat a record surge of COVID-19 cases. The province is reporting 449 new infections, which is its highest single-day count of new cases of the entire pandemic, plus another 4 deaths. The emergency order, which originally ended on July 11th, allows the Saskatchewan Health Authority to reduce elective surgeries and redeploy staff. Former Bank of Canada and Bank of England Governor Mark Carney says Canada must invest in retraining workers affected by the transition to a greener economy. The question of how to finance a lower carbon economy is on the agenda in the next UN climate conference in the UK. Mr. Carney is the UN Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance. He said the global financial sector must use their trillions of dollars in assets to help achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. The coroner's inquest into a Montreal-area long-term care home where dozens of seniors died in the first wave of the pandemic is hearing residents Heron was understaffed and under-equipped. Former Director of Care, Veronique Beauce, says there weren't enough washcloths and mattress protectors, and that the ratio of healthcare workers to patients was inadequate. Ms. Beauce claimed that the staffing shortage is because of low pay, testifying that patient attendants earned just $12 an hour in 2019. The bodies of 6 members of a family were found on Sunday in a burnt-out travel trailer in rural Nova Scotia. Police were called to Mountain Road in Millvale around 6:30 p.m. RCMP Corporal Chris Marshall says officers discovered the bodies of a 30-year-old man, a 28-year-old woman, and 4 children, ages 3, 4, 8, and 11. Police say a preliminary investigation indicates that the fire was not suspicious. The RCMP has concluded there was nothing criminal in last week's death of INUK activist DIEM Saunders. The 29-year-old died suddenly in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Labrador. DIEM Saunders, formerly known as Delilah Saunders, became a fierce advocate for Indigenous women and Indigenous land rights in Labrador. This was following the 2014 murder of their sister, Loretta Saunders, in Halifax. They won the Ambassador of Conscience Award from the Amnesty International Foundation in 2017. Tourism destinations are bracing for a busy winter without the usual supply of foreign workers to staff businesses. Some businesses say they are having to close for periods to give their limited staff a day off. Business owners say the lack of international workers has been particularly large as a burden. They are calling on the government to reduce barriers to make it easier for foreign workers. 19-year-old Canadian LAYLA FERNANDEZ shot up from 73rd in the World Tennis Association rankings to a career best of 28th. The woman who beat her to win the U.S. Open, 18-year-old Emma Raducanu from England, jumped 127 spots to a career high of number 23. Ms. Raducanu is the youngest woman to win a major championship. All right, we'll be right back with a look at the political priorities and battlegrounds in Atlantic Canada. We'll have an interview with Dr. Tom Bateman of St. Thomas University when we come back. That and, of course, more news from around the world only on Forum Daily. So stay tuned. We'll be back after a short break. Canadians across the country go to the polls on September 20th, and Atlantic Canada will be the first region in the country to be able to cast their votes. According to a recent survey by Narrative Research, Atlantic Canadians are less likely to vote for the same party every election. The September 10th survey also shows that Atlantic Canadians are more likely to decide who to vote for based on the local candidate. It also means some ridings have become interesting political battlegrounds. Well, to tell us more about the major concerns of Atlantic Canadians this election is Dr. Tom Bateman, professor at St. Thomas University in New Brunswick. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
So let's start with this, sir. What makes the voters in Atlantic Canada unique from those in other provinces?
I would say that there is a much greater attachment to place in Atlantic Canada, a little bit less personal mobility. And so the people who are here are attached to their ridings, to their provinces, and they tend to get to know the local candidates. Politics are very local in the Maritimes. And the disposition of Maritimers is kind of conservative in character. They change, but slowly. And so Canadians elsewhere experiment with new parties all the time. Not so much in the Maritimes. With some exceptions, it remains a two-party region.
All right, and what have been the primary concerns of Atlantic Canadians during this election, Doctor?
Yeah, well, a big one is why we're having an election anyway. I don't think Marit is more convinced than anyone else is about why there's an election within 2 years of the previous one. And but the other one, I would say, is healthcare. As you know, healthcare is at or near the top of federal voters' concerns all the time. And true in the Maritimes. Demographically, it's an older population. People use the healthcare system a lot. And of course, what we're experiencing during this COVID pandemic is acute nursing shortages, long wait times, to the extent that some emergency rooms actually have shut down over weekends for lack of staff them.
And I guess one of the big questions would be, have federal parties addressed the needs of Atlantic Canadians in the campaign trail so far?
Not particularly. I would say that the Maritimers have just been consuming the national media and what the leaders are saying. I don't detect any particular tailoring national campaign announcements to Atlantic Canadians in particular. But what's interesting is that all the parties are now tacking left of center, including the Tories. And those kinds of messages have receptive ears in Atlantic Canada. This is a province that depends on government transfers to a great extent. And so the interventionist orthodoxy that now seems to be becoming even more entrenched in Canadian politics is pretty good news for Maritimers.
All right, and what are the top battleground ridings in Atlantic Canada to watch on election night, Doctor?
Yeah, it's a good question. 32 seats are up for grabs in 2015. It was a shutout for the Liberals. The Liberals lost some seats in 2019. And by my count, I would say that there are 10 seats that are up for grabs next week. And perhaps one of the most interesting is the one in which I live, which is Fredericton, because it is represented by Jenica Atwin, who was elected in 2019 as a Green Party candidate. And then in June of this year, she switched and became a Liberal. The Liberal candidate in 2019 came in third in a close three-way. So the question is, will Jenica Atwin, now as a Liberal, get reelected? That depends on whether she can pull 2019 Green voters with her. And that's by no means obvious. So we've got a tight three-way race in Fredericton, but Miramichi is very, and St. John in New Brunswick also is very close. And a couple in Nova Scotia, one maybe in Newfoundland, are also close. So it could be an interesting evening on the 20th.
All right, sir. An interesting evening indeed. We'll definitely keep an eye out for that, sir. Thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
My pleasure.
Stay with us. When we come back, we'll take a look at stories happening across the country. BC lifts its state of emergency due to wildfires. Alberta is offering $100 to residents getting vaccinated, and Toronto City workers have till the end of the week for their COVID-19 status. We'll be right back. The BC government is ending a provincial state of emergency today. This is because of wildfires in a season that has seen about 32,000 people displaced. It says the wildfire season is not over and the public needs to remain prepared and follow the direction of local authorities. The state of emergency was declared on July 20th and will expire at 11:59 p.m. As of yesterday, 205 wildfires were burning, with 3 evacuation orders still in place, affecting about 223 properties. BC's provincial health officer says she is stunned and saddened that people are gathering outside of hospitals to protest the province's vaccine passport. Bonnie Henry says healthcare staff have worked flat out for nearly 20 months, and many are exhausted as ICU beds are filling up, mostly with unvaccinated patients. Registration opened yesterday in Alberta for people getting a first or second dose of COVID-19 vaccine to claim a $100 debit card. As of Monday afternoon, government spokeswoman Lisa Glover said 3,216 people had registered for the debit cards. The government earlier announced the plan to incentivize vaccine uptake. As of Sunday, just over 79% of those 12 and older had received one vaccine dose, with slightly more than 71% fully vaccinated. A fungus that is destroying bat populations in eastern North America has made its first appearance on the Canadian prairies. The Wildlife Conservation Society says it has found the fungus that causes white nose syndrome in eastern Saskatchewan. That disease is responsible for killing millions of bats in eastern North America, often wiping out entire colonies. U.S. studies indicate bats eat insects that would otherwise cause billions of dollars in crop damage. A protest against vaccine mandates in Manitoba had a change of venue following backlash from the public. The protest was originally planned outside Winnipeg's Health Sciences Centre Hospital yesterday. Protesters instead marched from the Manitoba legislature down Main Street to City Hall, where they stood in silence. There was another protest 2 weeks ago outside the Health Sciences Centre. Dr. Cheryl Cusack of the Association of Registered Nurses of Manitoba says the protests are disheartening and stressful for the nurses working amid the pandemic. Well, meanwhile, police in Winnipeg say a robbery in the city yesterday poses a risk to the public. They say a significant quantity of methadone in a liter-sized bottle was stolen. Methadone is a treatment drug for opioid addiction, and police say there is a risk of potential overdoses. Police are asking anyone with information that could assist investigators to call them. Police in London, Ontario, say they are aware of information circulating on social media about alleged recent sexual assaults on the Western University campus. The police force says it hasn't received any formal reports of assaults at the school over the weekend, but it is opening an investigation. It also notes police received 2 reports the week before about other sexual assaults alleged to have happened on campus. City of Toronto workers now have until the end of the week to disclose their COVID-19 immunization status. The city initially set yesterday as the deadline, but a spokesperson says some staff who do not have regular access to computers need additional time. All employees who are either unvaccinated or refuse to disclose their status will be required to participate in an information session about the benefits of vaccines. Employees will then have until September 30th to get at least 1 dose of COVID-19 vaccine and October 30th to be fully vaccinated. Police say there were no disruptions to services at Toronto General Hospital as a result of a protest against COVID-19 measures yesterday. They say there were also no reports of any patients or staff being blocked from accessing the facility. Protesters denouncing health measures and the province's soon-to-be-enacted proof of vaccination system gathered outside the hospital yesterday afternoon. Similar events were held in other cities, including Calgary, Montreal, and Halifax. New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs says Cabinet will discuss new measures to prompt more people to get fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Mr. Higgs says that could include requiring proof of vaccination to access non-essential services, businesses, and activities. He made the statement as the province reported 122 new cases of COVID-19 since Friday. COVID-19 cases have been reported at 11 schools. This prompted a mandatory mask order for all students in schools and on buses for at least the next 2 weeks. The outbreaks of COVID-19 among students in Charlottetown PEI continues to grow. There are now 10 students at West Royalty Elementary School and 2 at Charlottetown Rural High School with the illness. This comes after 4 new cases were reported on Monday. The province also reported a new case in a person in their 60s who had traveled out of the province. There are 19 active cases of COVID-19 in Prince Edward Island. All right, stay with us. We'll have more top stories from around the world coming up next, only on Forum Daily. We'll be right back. Senior diplomats from Japan, the United States, and South Korea say they are still willing to hold talks with North Korea. The talks will center over its missile and nuclear development. This comes a day after Pyongyang announced that it successfully tested new long-range cruise missiles. North Korea says it needs its armament program and nuclear weapons in order to deter what it claims is hostility from Washington and Seoul. Leaders of Egypt and Israel have met for the first time in over a decade, and the issue of rising tensions in the Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip is at the top of their agenda. Gaza is sandwiched between Israel and Egypt. Both countries have enforced a border blockade of the territory to varying degrees since 2007. This is when the Hamas group took control. The meeting between Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett may signal a new era in relations between the two countries. Guinea's military rulers are expected to face more pressure to set a time frame for new elections. The junta is opening a 4-day series of meetings about the West African nation's future. This is following the coup just over a week ago. Concerns are growing about how quickly the junta, led by Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, will give up power to a civilian-led transitional government. This has been called for by regional mediators and the international community. The coup has been cautiously welcomed by other longtime opponents of deposed President Alpha Conde. India's leaders are concerned by the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. They fear it may benefit Pakistan and feed an insurgency in the Kashmir region. Dipendra Singh Huda, a former military commander, said militant groups based across the border in Pakistan would certainly try and push men into Kashmir. This is due to the Taliban victory in Afghanistan. Indian officials worry that Afghanistan under the Taliban could be a base for organizing Islamist militants in Kashmir. Neighbors, India and Pakistan, both rule parts of Muslim-majority Kashmir, but claim it in full. Meanwhile, hundreds of Pakistani journalists have rallied outside of Parliament to reject a bill that they say would limit media freedom. Senior opposition leaders and civil society members also joined the protest. The legislation allows for the establishment of a new regulatory body called the Pakistan Media Development Authority. The legislation was introduced by the government in May. Since then, the government has not been able to move it through Parliament. This is because of opposition from the owners of news organizations and journalist unions. Spain's government is slashing energy taxes. This is part of a package of measures aimed at reducing household electricity costs. The government says its goal is to shift fiscal benefits to consumers. This and also to head off a potential sharp increase in natural gas prices. The government says the hikes in electricity bills are driven by spiraling prices of so-called carbon certificates, gas imports, and surging power demand in recent months. Nigeria is seeing one of its worst cholera outbreaks in years. More than 2,300 people are dying from suspected cases. This is leaving Africa's most populous country struggling to deal with multiple disease outbreaks. This year's cholera outbreak has a higher case fatality rate than the previous 4 years. It has worsened as many consider the pandemic to be a bigger priority for state governments. States in Nigeria's north have been hit hardest because of flooding and poor sanitation. The 19 states in the north account for 98% of the suspected cases. A Dutch court has given Uber drivers a major level up when it comes to their benefits. The court in Amsterdam has ruled that Uber drivers fall under the Dutch taxi drivers' collective labor deal. That means they're entitled to the same employment benefits as taxi drivers. The workers' group that brought the case calls the decision a major win for Uber drivers. For its part, Uber says it will appeal the ruling. The environmental group Global Witness reports 2020 was the deadliest year for environmental defenders. This comes after it started keeping information in 2012. The British-based group says at least 227 people died last year while defending their homes, land, and livelihoods from environmental exploitation. Almost a third of the deaths were linked to mining, logging, and dam projects, and all but one occurred in developing countries in the southern hemisphere. A SpaceX rocket will blast into orbit with no professional astronauts aboard, only 4 tourists. It's a first in 60 years of human spaceflight. The first private flight will be led by a 38-year-old entrepreneur who is bankrolling the entire trip. He is taking 2 sweepstakes winners with him on the 3-day trip circling Earth, along with a healthcare worker who survived childhood cancer. Liftoff is set for Wednesday night from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. All right, that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, or follow us on social media. We're available on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and this was Forum Daily.